My friends, it is no small thing to speak of spiritual attacks. These are battles not fought with swords, nor do they announce themselves with the blaring of trumpets. Instead, they arrive quietly, often unnoticed, weaving into the fabric of our thoughts, emotions, and daily routines. Let us then, with clarity of mind, consider the signs of such an attack, for to name the enemy is to weaken its hold. First, we must grasp the nature of these battles. Spiritual attacks target not the body but the soul. They aim to distort our perception of truth, sow confusion, and isolate us from the source of all light. Like a predator separating its prey from the herd, such attacks thrive on disconnection. Have you found yourself estranged from practices that once brought you peace? The morning prayer feels a chore, the sacred texts gather dust, and the fellowship of kindred souls becomes an inconvenience. This creeping isolation is no coincidence, it is a tactic. Second, beware the voice of doubt and fear. These whispers may not shout but persist, corroding confidence in the promises of the divine. You are unworthy, they say. You are forgotten, or perhaps, most insidious of all, they suggest that what is good and holy is not enough. It is not that fear or doubt is unnatural, but their excess when they choke faith and hope signals a deeper assault. Third, let us consider the tyranny of distraction. How easy it is to fill our days with the clamor of obligations, entertainment, and endless tasks. Yet in doing so, we leave little room for reflection or connection with the eternal. It is not that these pursuits are inherently wrong, rather, when they dominate, they draw us away from the still, small voice that calls us back to our purpose. Fourth, pay heed to the state of your heart. A sudden and inexplicable anger, a gnawing bitterness, or a persistent despair may not merely be the result of circumstance. Such emotions can serve as signposts, pointing to an attack on your peace. The enemy thrives in disorder, and the division of the self and inner war makes us vulnerable to external forces. Fifth, we come to the loss of purpose and hope. This is perhaps the most tragic sign of all, for it strikes at the heart of our reason for being. To feel adrift, as though one's life is without meaning or direction, is to lose the compass by which we navigate. This state of being is not natural, it is a warning, a call to arms for the soul. The nature of spiritual battles is both profound and perplexing. Unlike physical confrontations, which are tangible and visible, spiritual attacks operate in the unseen realm, affecting the very core of a person's being, their soul, mind, and heart. These battles often feel elusive, subtle, and insidious, making them difficult to detect until their effects have taken root. To understand spiritual attacks, one must first grasp that they are not random occurrences, but deliberate attempts to disrupt, distract, and ultimately detach individuals from their connection to truth and the divine. Such battles are a reflection of the larger cosmic struggle between forces of good and evil, where the stakes are nothing less than the orientation of a soul toward its highest purpose. At the heart of a spiritual attack is the aim to distort one's perception of truth. Truth, in its essence, anchors the soul, providing clarity and direction in life. When truth becomes blurred or questioned, the foundation of one's spiritual stability is shaken. This distortion often manifests subtly through half-truths, rationalizations, or the gradual erosion of trust in spiritual principles that once seemed unshakable. For instance, doubt may arise not as an outright rejection of truth, but as a nagging uncertainty that grows over time. This seed of doubt can lead to confusion, making it difficult to discern right from wrong, good from evil, or purpose from distraction. In this way, spiritual battles are waged on the battlefield of perception, where clarity is obscured and trust is undermined. The human soul is inherently relational, created to thrive in connection with others and with the divine. However, a spiritual attack seeks to sever these connections, drawing individuals into a state of loneliness and self-reliance. This isolation is not always dramatic. It often begins with small choices, skipping a gathering of like-minded believers, neglecting moments of quiet prayer, or avoiding discussions about spiritual matters. Over time, these choices create a widening chasm between the individual and the sources of spiritual nourishment. Like a sheep separated from the flock, the soul becomes vulnerable when it is detached from its community and guide. Spiritual battles are also characterized by their tendency to exploit moments of vulnerability. Just as a physical predator targets the weak or isolated, spiritual forces often strike when a person is weary, overwhelmed, or distracted. It is during these moments of weakness that the subtle nature of spiritual attacks becomes most apparent. For example, someone grappling with personal loss may begin to question the goodness of life or the fairness of divine providence. The questions themselves are not inherently wrong, but the manner in which they are exploited to sow despair or bitterness reveals the underlying nature of the attack. The subtlety lies in the fact that the person may not even recognize they are under assault. They may attribute their struggles solely to external circumstances, unaware of the deeper spiritual dimensions at play. What makes spiritual attacks particularly challenging is their ability to mimic natural emotions and experiences. Fear, doubt, anger, and loneliness are part of the human condition. But in the context of spiritual battles, these emotions are amplified or twisted in ways that lead individuals away from peace and purpose. For instance, a healthy concern for one's future may morph into paralyzing anxiety, or a desire for justice may devolve into consuming anger. The emotional intensity can cloud judgment, making it difficult to distinguish between what is natural and what is orchestrated as part of a larger spiritual struggle. This ability to blend seamlessly with everyday experiences makes spiritual attacks both pervasive and deceptive. They do not always come in the form of overt temptations to do wrong, but can appear as distractions that seem benign or even good. For example, an overcommitment to work, hobbies, or social activities can pull attention away from spiritual disciplines. These pursuits, while not inherently harmful, can become tools of attack when they disrupt the balance of life and lead to spiritual neglect. The gradual nature of this process is key. Spiritual attacks rarely happen in a single, dramatic event. Instead, they unfold incrementally, so subtly that a person may not realize they have drifted until they feel distant from the truth they once held dear. Just as no two people are identical, no two spiritual attacks are the same. What tempts or troubles one person may have little effect on another. This individualized nature of spiritual struggles underscores the need for self-awareness. By understanding one's own tendencies, whether toward doubt, fear, pride, or distraction, one can better recognize when these areas are being exploited. Without such awareness, the signs of a spiritual attack may go unnoticed, allowing the attack to progress unchecked. Disconnection from truth is one of the most critical signs of a spiritual attack, and its impact is often far-reaching. Truth serves as a compass for the soul, anchoring it in a reality that transcends fleeting emotions or external circumstances. When this connection is weakened or severed, individuals become more susceptible to confusion, doubt, and ultimately spiritual stagnation. The disconnection often begins subtly, creeping into the heart and mind through a combination of neglect, distraction, and deception, until what once felt secure and unshakable becomes distant and unreliable. A primary way disconnection from truth manifests is through a loss of clarity. Truth is not just an abstract ideal, it is a lens through which one views the world, interprets experiences, and makes decisions. When this lens is distorted, perceptions become clouded. Right and wrong no longer seem as distinct as they once did, and moral absolutes may start to feel like shifting sands. This loss of clarity can lead to a state of indecision, where a person feels paralyzed, unable to move forward spiritually or otherwise. Instead of a life guided by conviction and purpose, the individual may find themselves caught in a loop of second guessing and hesitation. Spiritual truths often require a measure of faith, a belief in something greater than oneself, something unseen but deeply real. During a spiritual attack, this faith is challenged. Doubts creep in, often beginning with small, seemingly harmless questions. Is this really true? What if I've been wrong? While questioning can be healthy and lead to deeper understanding, in the context of a spiritual attack, these doubts are not constructive. Instead, they are designed to chip away at trust, leaving the individual feeling unmoored and skeptical of the very truths that once brought them peace and direction. A particularly insidious aspect of this disconnection is the tendency for it to isolate the individual. Truth, in a spiritual sense, is often reinforced through community, through shared beliefs, teachings, and the encouragement of others who walk the same path. When a person begins to disconnect from truth, they often withdraw from these sources of reinforcement. They may avoid conversations about faith, skip gatherings of like-minded individuals, or even feel a sense of alienation from those who continue to embrace spiritual truths. This isolation creates a feedback loop. The further they drift from the truth, the more alone they feel, and the more alone they feel, the harder it becomes to reconnect. The role of deception in fostering disconnection cannot be overstated. Spiritual attacks are rarely blatant. They rely on subtle distortions of truth that can be difficult to detect. Deception often takes the form of half-truth statements or ideas that contain a kernel of accuracy but are twisted to lead a person astray. For example, the notion that one must strive to achieve perfection might seem noble on the surface, but it can quickly devolve into an unhealthy obsession with performance, causing a person to feel unworthy and distant from the divine. Similarly, the idea that everyone should follow their heart may sound empowering, but it can lead to decisions driven by fleeting emotions rather than enduring principles. Disconnection from truth is also exacerbated by the relentless distractions of modern life. The constant barrage of information, entertainment, and responsibilities can make it difficult to focus on spiritual disciplines that keep one grounded in truth. Over time, the neglect of practices such as prayer, meditation, or study creates a spiritual void. Without intentional effort to engage with truth, the soul becomes vulnerable to alternative narratives, those that prioritize material success, personal gratification, or societal approval over spiritual alignment. These narratives, while appealing, ultimately lead to discontentment and a sense of spiritual emptiness. The emotional toll of disconnection from truth is another significant factor. As truth becomes more distant, feelings of doubt, anxiety, and despair often take its place. The absence of truth leaves a vacuum, and in that space, negative emotions thrive. An individual may feel a profound sense of restlessness, as though something essential is missing from their life. This restlessness can manifest as irritability, cynicism, or even outright hopelessness. Without the grounding presence of truth, emotions become untethered, swaying the individual in unpredictable and often destructive directions. Spiritual truths often speak softly, requiring stillness and attentiveness to hear. In contrast, the distractions and deceptions that fuel disconnection are loud and persistent, demanding immediate attention. Over time, the cacophony of external influences drowns out the still, small voice of truth, leaving the individual confused and directionless. This inability to discern leads to poor decision-making, further entrenching the individual in a cycle of disconnection and spiritual disorientation. Truth provides a framework for understanding one's place in the world and their relationship to the divine. When this framework is compromised, life can feel fragmented and purposeless. The individual may begin to question the significance of their actions, relationships, and goals. This sense of purposelessness is not just disheartening, it is a clear indication that the individual is under spiritual attack. Without truth to anchor them, they drift, feeling increasingly disconnected from the deeper meaning that once brought joy and fulfillment. Distraction and busyness are two of the most powerful and often underestimated tools of spiritual attack. They do not arrive as overt threats but creep in through the mundane aspects of daily life, slowly eroding the time and space necessary for spiritual growth. In a world that constantly demands attention through work, social obligations, entertainment, and the endless barrage of information, individuals can easily find themselves caught in a cycle of relentless activity. Over time, this busyness becomes a barrier to spiritual connection, leaving little room for reflection, prayer, or any meaningful engagement with the divine. The more distracted a person becomes, the less they can tune into the stillness that allows them to hear the truth, reflect on their life's purpose, and cultivate inner peace. In the modern world, success is often measured by how busy or productive one is. We are constantly told that time is money and that being busy equates to being important. This cultural norm fosters a sense of urgency and importance around every task, no matter how trivial. As a result, people often prioritize immediate concerns over long-term spiritual health. Time once spent in quiet contemplation or spiritual practice is gradually filled with errands, work responsibilities, and social commitments. While these activities are not inherently harmful, when they overwhelm a person's life, they distract from the higher callings of the spirit. This constant state of busyness draws the individual's focus away from what truly matters, leaving them spiritually impoverished. The problem with distraction lies in how it affects one's ability to be present. Spiritual growth requires attention and presence, but distraction keeps the mind in a perpetual state of fragmentation. The person caught in the web of constant tasks cannot fully engage with any one activity. Their thoughts are divided, and their emotions scattered, leaving them unable to fully experience the moment. This lack of presence undermines the very foundation of spiritual practice, which demands a deep and intentional engagement with life, the self, and the divine. Distraction, in this sense, is a form of spiritual dissociation, where the individual is unable to connect deeply with their inner self, or with the source of their spiritual nourishment. The more overwhelmed one feels by the demands of daily life, the more they may rely on their own strength and abilities to keep everything running smoothly. This self-sufficiency, while it may seem necessary in the short term, fosters a disconnect from divine dependence. A person caught in the grip of constant activity often believes they must do everything themselves, leading them to neglect the deeper truth that their strength and guidance come from a higher source. In a state of perpetual busyness, there is little time for surrender, prayer, or reflection, all of which are crucial for spiritual well-being. Instead, the individual becomes trapped in a cycle of doing rather than being. The distractions that arise from modern life often come with an overload of external stimuli such as social media, television, news, and other forms of entertainment. While these may provide temporary relief or distraction from the pressures of life, they rarely offer any lasting peace or fulfillment. The mind becomes inundated with superficial content, leaving no space for deep reflection or spiritual engagement. Over time, this flood of external information dulls the sensitivity of the soul, making it more difficult to hear the quiet whispers of truth and guidance. The soul becomes numb to the deeper rhythms of life, overwhelmed by the noise of the world. As the individual becomes more preoccupied with the demands of daily life, the spark of spiritual enthusiasm begins to dim. What was once a vibrant and meaningful practice, whether it was prayer, meditation, or simply moments of quiet reflection, becomes an afterthought, something to be squeezed into the remaining cracks of an already overstuffed schedule. This shift does not usually occur overnight, but happens incrementally. First, a missed prayer here, a skipped reflection there. Slowly, these small lapses add up, and what once felt essential becomes an optional luxury. The soul, in this state, becomes starved for nourishment, and without the spiritual sustenance it needs, it begins to wither. In a world that values efficiency and productivity, it's easy to confuse activity with progress. The individual may feel as though they are accomplishing much because they are constantly moving from task to task, but in reality they may be moving further away from their true purpose. Spiritual growth is not measured by outward achievements or the accumulation of tasks. It is measured by the depth of one's inner transformation, which requires focused attention and intentional action. Busyness, then, becomes a form of spiritual inertia, where the individual appears to be active but is actually going nowhere of significance. The cycle of distraction can be especially damaging to relationships. When a person is caught up in constant activity, their relationships with others may suffer. Family, friends, and even colleagues can be neglected in favor of an endless to-do list. The lack of emotional presence or attentiveness to those around us diminishes the depth and richness of our connections. This, in turn, further isolates the individual, reinforcing the disconnect from both the people around them and their spiritual source. True connection with others is impossible when one is perpetually distracted or preoccupied with personal agendas. Distraction leads to spiritual dryness. Just as a plant withers without adequate sunlight and water, the soul withers without regular spiritual nourishment. The absence of practices that cultivate connection to the divine, such as prayer, study, and contemplation, leaves the soul hungry and thirsty. This spiritual thirst, when unaddressed, manifests as dissatisfaction, frustration, and a longing for something deeper. However, because the individual is caught up in the endless cycle of busyness, they rarely pause long enough to address this inner thirst, compounding their feelings of emptiness and unrest. Emotional turmoil is one of the most revealing signs of a spiritual attack, often manifesting as sudden, unexplained shifts in mood and temperament. These intense emotional upheavals, though they may appear to be the natural result of life's difficulties, are frequently the result of deeper spiritual struggles. When emotions become unmoored from reason and begin to dominate one's thoughts and actions, it is a strong indication that a spiritual assault is underway. What is significant about emotional turmoil in the context of spiritual warfare is that it has the power to cloud judgment, distort perceptions, and lead the individual away from peace, clarity, and connection to the divine. Understanding the causes and effects of emotional turmoil during a spiritual attack can help identify it early and prevent it from taking root. Anger, in itself, is not inherently wrong. It can be a healthy response to injustice or wrongdoing. However, when anger becomes disproportionate to the situation, persistent or irrational, it becomes a clear sign that something deeper is at work. Spiritual attacks often exploit unresolved wounds, triggers, and vulnerabilities, inflaming them to the point where the individual feels consumed by bitterness or rage. This anger, when allowed to fester, poisons the mind and spirit, turning small grievances into major battles. Rather than seeking resolution or understanding, the person caught in this emotional turmoil is driven by the desire to fight, to blame, and to hold grudges. In this state, the individual loses the ability to see the bigger picture, and relationships can be damaged, often irreparably. The spiritual attack then manifests as a toxic emotional fog, clouding the individual's ability to experience peace, love, or forgiveness. Alongside anger, despair is another deeply troubling emotional response to a spiritual attack. Despair is marked by a pervasive sense of hopelessness, an inability to see a way forward, or the belief that nothing will ever improve. This emotional state can often feel like a heavy weight on the soul, making it hard to function or find any sense of joy or meaning in life. The individual may feel as though they are trapped in an unending cycle of suffering, unable to break free. Spiritual despair is often accompanied by feelings of worthlessness or unworthiness, as though the person has somehow failed or is being punished. In these moments, the soul feels disconnected from hope, and the light of faith seems dim or extinguished entirely. This emotional turmoil can lead to spiritual withdrawal, as the individual may distance themselves from their spiritual practices or community, further reinforcing the isolation that the attack seeks to create. Despair can be especially dangerous because it robs the individual of the strength to resist, making it difficult for them to seek the help or solace that they so desperately need. Bitterness is yet another emotional manifestation of a spiritual attack. It begins with a hurt or an offense, often something that feels deeply personal. If this wound is not addressed or healed, it gradually turns into resentment and bitterness, a lingering poison that affects every area of life. In the context of a spiritual attack, bitterness is often fed by lies such as the belief that one has been wronged in some unforgivable way, or that there is no hope for reconciliation. Over time, bitterness can become a pervasive attitude, coloring the individual's view of others and even of themselves. This emotional turmoil drives a wedge between the individual and the people around them, leading to further isolation. What begins as a small hurt grows into a spiritual stronghold, one that binds the person to negative thoughts and actions. The longer bitterness is allowed to fester, the more it undermines the individual's ability to experience love, joy, or peace, both in their relationships and in their connection with the divine. Fear is another powerful emotion that often accompanies spiritual attacks. It may begin as a vague unease, but in time it can become all-consuming, leading to anxiety, paranoia, or irrational phobias. The nature of fear is that it distorts reality, making the person feel as though danger is lurking around every corner. Spiritual fear is often rooted in the lie that the individual is alone, unsupported, or abandoned by God. It may manifest as a constant, low-grade anxiety, or as a sudden and overwhelming sense of dread, often without any clear cause. This emotional turmoil can cause the person to withdraw from life, to avoid situations that feel threatening, and to retreat into a shell of self-protection. The fear may extend beyond personal safety to spiritual fears, doubts about one's salvation, eternal destiny, or worthiness. In either case, fear isolates the individual from their sense of security and peace. The attack thrives in this emotional state, as fear breeds further fear, creating a vicious cycle that is hard to break without intervention. Anxiety, which often accompanies fear, is another form of emotional turmoil that signals a spiritual attack. Anxiety can manifest as a constant state of unease, where the individual feels overwhelmed by the weight of their thoughts and responsibilities. In this state, the person may feel like they are constantly on edge, unable to relax or find peace. Anxiety often stems from a perceived loss of control, where the person feels unable to manage the demands of life or fears the unknown future. It can make even the simplest tasks feel insurmountable, and it erodes the individual's ability to trust in the divine care and guidance that should be their source of comfort. The emotional turmoil caused by anxiety can disrupt daily life, making it difficult to concentrate, relate to others, or engage in spiritual practices. Emotional turmoil in the form of confusion can arise during a spiritual attack. When the mind is under assault, clarity of thought becomes elusive, and the person may feel bewildered and uncertain about everything around them. This confusion can lead to indecision and an inability to make simple choices, which further exacerbates feelings of frustration and helplessness. In this emotional state, the person may question their purpose, their identity, and even their faith. Confusion can cloud the mind to the point where the individual cannot discern between their true desires and the lies being whispered to them. They may feel as though they are walking through a fog, unsure of which direction to take or how to resolve the inner turmoil they are experiencing. Emotional turmoil, then, becomes a tool of spiritual attack by destabilizing the individual and causing them to lose sight of their spiritual center. Whether it manifests as anger, despair, bitterness, fear, anxiety, or confusion, it disrupts the soul's peace and leads the individual away from a grounded, truthful understanding of their situation. By exploiting vulnerabilities and exacerbating emotional wounds, the spiritual attack seeks to create a barrier between the person and the divine, cutting them off from the hope, strength, and guidance they need to overcome. Recognizing and addressing these emotional upheavals is vital for restoring balance and clarity and for resisting the negative spiritual forces at work. Loss of purpose is one of the most subtle yet profound signs of a spiritual attack, often creeping in unnoticed over time. When a person loses their sense of direction or feels disconnected from their calling or values, they may experience a deep sense of emptiness or confusion. This loss is not necessarily tied to a specific event or change in life circumstances, but rather it arises from a gradual erosion of the soul's connection to its deeper purpose. In times of spiritual attack, the enemy seeks to cloud the individual's sense of meaning, leaving them adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Without purpose, a person may feel like they are merely existing, rather than truly living with intention and fulfillment. At the root of this loss of purpose is a spiritual disorientation. Purpose is inherently tied to a sense of direction in life, and when that direction becomes unclear, everything else in life starts to feel aimless. The person may begin to question their decisions, their path, and their very reason for being. What once felt like a clear calling or mission can seem distant or impossible to achieve. This disorientation often leads to a feeling of spiritual paralysis, where the individual is unsure of where to go or how to proceed. Rather than waking up with a sense of excitement or motivation, they find themselves going through the motions of daily life without any real sense of why they are doing what they are doing. This lack of purpose leads to an overwhelming sense of frustration and dissatisfaction. When a person feels disconnected from their higher purpose or calling, the world can begin to feel flat and devoid of significance. Activities that once brought joy or fulfillment may seem shallow or unimportant. Relationships, work, and personal achievements no longer hold the same weight they once did, and even simple pleasures lose their luster. The individual may feel as though they are merely going through the motions of life, without any greater reason for doing so. This feeling of meaninglessness can lead to a profound sense of emptiness, as the person struggles to find anything that resonates with their soul. It is in these moments of spiritual attack that the enemy seeks to rob them of their sense of value and purpose, leaving them feeling hopeless and directionless. When a person loses sight of their spiritual calling or connection to a higher power, they may begin to question who they are and what their role in the world is. The sense of self becomes fractured, and the person struggles to reconcile their past sense of purpose with their present reality. This identity crisis can lead to feelings of disillusionment, as the individual is unsure of where they fit into the larger picture of life. They may experience a disconnect between their actions and their values, as they feel compelled to pursue goals or lifestyles that do not align with their deeper beliefs. The lack of alignment between their inner self and outward actions exacerbates feelings of confusion and loss. This disconnection from purpose also often results in a loss of passion. Passion is the driving force behind meaningful work, relationships, and personal growth. When a person loses their sense of purpose, their enthusiasm and energy begin to fade. They may feel as though they are moving through life on autopilot, no longer deeply invested in the things that once excited them. The projects, goals, and dreams that once felt urgent and compelling now seem trivial or unattainable. Without a clear sense of purpose, motivation wanes, and the individual may find themselves procrastinating, avoiding challenges, or giving up on long-term aspirations. This lack of passion leads to a sense of apathy, where the person feels detached from their own potential and the joy of living with purpose. A significant part of this loss of purpose also involves a disconnection from one's spiritual foundation. For those who have a religious or spiritual framework, the loss of purpose often corresponds to a loss of connection to the divine. The person may no longer feel that their life has any spiritual meaning or that they are being guided by a higher power. The practices that once brought them peace, whether prayer, meditation, worship, or study, may feel dry or pointless. Without the spiritual grounding that purpose provides, the individual may struggle to find any sense of fulfillment or meaning in their day-to-day life. This separation from the divine is particularly damaging, as it cuts the individual off from the source of their true purpose and the strength they need to carry out their mission in the world. Purpose connects individuals to something larger than themselves, whether it is a calling to serve others, a mission to create, or a responsibility to care for the world around them. When that purpose is lost, the individual can feel disconnected from others and from the world at large. They may withdraw from social interactions or activities that once felt meaningful, further deepening their sense of loneliness and alienation. This emotional isolation is a key component of spiritual attacks, as the enemy seeks to create a barrier between the individual and their sense of connection to both the divine and the world around them. Without a sense of direction or a clear understanding of their values and goals, the individual may find themselves indecisive, unsure of how to move forward. Small decisions may become overwhelming, and long-term choices seem fraught with uncertainty. This inability to make decisions contributes to the feeling of being stuck or trapped, as though the individual is standing at a crossroads but has no idea which path to take. The lack of clarity makes it difficult for them to engage with life in an intentional way, leading to feelings of helplessness and frustration. The root of the loss of purpose lies in the gradual removal of the spiritual anchors that guide an individual's life. A strong sense of purpose is built upon a foundation of faith, conviction, and connection to the divine. When these elements are eroded, whether through distraction, disillusionment, or spiritual attack, the person becomes adrift, struggling to find meaning and direction. This loss of purpose, however, is not a permanent condition. Through intentional efforts to reconnect with one's values, faith, and calling, it is possible to restore a sense of purpose and direction. Recognizing the spiritual nature of this loss is the first step toward reclaiming one's mission and finding the strength to pursue it once again.